Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. We're here for another book review. This time, as given by my lovely hint by my lovely shirt, it is about Egypt. It is A History of Egypt from earliest times to the present by Jason Thompson, who is himself is half Egyptian, which is very good. This book covers the entire history of Egypt, which is very rare. Or trust me, it took me forever to find this, and this is from 2008, so it's even outdated, but it's still nonetheless a very valuable book. But I would say that, people need to work more on these types of books. If you know of any other about the entire history of Egypt, please let me know in the comment section, because I'm all about that. Let's start off this book review. I'll be going chapter to chapter, giving my thoughts on it, but let's just start off with what it says, the review from the Al-Ahram Weekly, an Egyptian news outlet. It says, a remarkable work of synthesis, cohesion, and understanding. I totally agree with that. It's easy to understand, it's concise, and it synthesizes the entire Egyptian history, which is not very common, so it's quite remarkable. Wonderfully vivid. I would say yes, this book is vivid. However, I wouldn't call it necessarily wonderfully vivid. I feel like it could go into more detail to become wonderfully vivid. The first major work of its kind, and it succeeds triumphantly. I definitely do agree with that. I feel like it may be the only work, like I already said, the only work of its kind, and it is very, very good. The first chapter starts off, The Gift of the Nile. It basically talks about the foundation of Egypt more from a scientific perspective, with like evolution and geology and all that and stuff like that. And it talks about sort of the prehistory of Egypt, which I find very fascinating, since most books or anything about Egypt doesn't really cover that. So I think that's very important. Next is chapter 2, The Birth of Egyptian Civilization, Pre-Dynastic and Early Dynastic Egypt. It talks about how like ancient Egyptian chronology, which is very important to understand the book properly, and some of what laid the foundation for the mighty Egyptian society. And that was very lovely. The Old Kingdom, another very lovely chapter. I found most of his work on ancient Egypt was very good, and quite good detail. However, I feel the Old Kingdom could get a bit more detail on some of the kings, and it does talk a lot about the pyramids, but again, could go a bit further, in my opinion. It also talks about, I learned a new fact from this book, the longest reigning Egyptian pharaoh, which was Pepi II, for 94 years, which I did a quick Google research, is the second longest ever reign of someone in the world, which is very fascinating given that it was the Old Kingdom. So we're talking like 3,000 plus years ago. That is very long. Very, very long. The next chapter is, actually more than 4,000 years ago he reigned. So very long time ago, and that's impressive, 94 years. The next is the first intermediate period in the Middle Kingdom, which was very well done again. However, I feel like there was, as it should be, there was lots of focus on Akhenaten and the father of Tutankhamun and Tutankhamun himself. I feel like I would like a bit more detail on the other pharaohs of the time, and maybe a bit more about daily life in the Middle Kingdom. But it was very well done. This next chapter is the second intermediate period in the New Kingdom, which again, sort of the same comments, very well done. Not much to complain about or saying anything. But again, there could always be more detail in my opinion, but that's just me. And then it talks about what happened during those reigns. Then the next chapter is that third intermediate period, and the late period, which is sort of the time, there's less is known about this period in a sense. It's sort of the time between the Roman and Greek age and the New Kingdom. That was very well done. Then my next chapter 7 is my favorite. It's Ptolemaic Egypt. I love Ptolemaic. Or maybe it's my second. I'm not sure. I'm divided between this and the Coptic history. Ptolemaic Egypt, lovely. Cleopatra, famous. This one I would love more detail on, but again, very well covered. It talks about how it was formed and all of that with the ancestors of Alexander the Great dividing regions into 3 parts, and Ptolemaic Egypt was one of them. Next chapter was Egypt in the Roman Empire, which was lovely, and then Coptic Egypt. Lovely, love Coptic history. It is very good. I love how he talks about the importance of Christianity to Egypt, as it still is a very important role in Egyptian society, and one of the first Christian places in the world, very important. It talks about the influence of Egypt on Christianity, which I think is very... But I feel like this part in particular is lacking detail. Definitely needs more detail. I think it would be cool to cover all the monks in more detail and all the saints and all that from Egypt itself and all the wonderful history that was established. But they really did a lovely job nonetheless. And also talks about sort of some of the persecution they faced during the Byzantine Empire, as Coptic Orthodoxy and Greek Orthodoxy are slightly separated, but if you read the book, you'll understand why. Highly recommend it. Then the middle of the book we've reached has some lovely photos. I would love if these were in color rather than in black and white, but given that it was from 2008, I feel like it gets a pass on that. If it was nowadays, I would say it needs to be colored, but it gets a pass from 2008. The next one is the advent of Islam. So it talks about the creation of Islam and the influence on Egypt. Again, very, very important. And it talks also about why Islam became successful, sort of because the Byzantines and the Persians were too busy with each other and keep fighting each other, that Islam did take hold. If it wasn't for that, it wouldn't have happened. It talks about that in great detail. And then afterwards, it's the Fatimids and the Ayyubs it talks about, which is an Islamic dynasty. And most of these Islamic dynasties were very important in Egypt, given that Egypt was a main political, economic, and for most of the population was. So Egypt was very important. Sadly, during this period, it does talk about this, how many Christians were forced to convert to Islam and suffered executions, which I think is important to point out, and how there was many discriminatory laws and effects that affect Christians deeply during this time. And yeah, and you can see how it still influences society today in Egypt, how they are marginalized and not as important in society as they really should be, and some of the tragedies they faced. The next is the Mamluks, sort of the same stuff, just different period, and talks about how the Mamluks were established and how they would set up their heirs. I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but you should read this chapter. It was very interesting. Next is Egypt and the Ottoman Empire, a very important chapter, as the Ottoman Empire influenced Egyptian history and vice versa. And then it talks about that, which is very good. The next chapter is the birth of modern Egypt, so he talks about Napoleon Bonaparte's role in that, which is very good. And then this is where he also talks about Napoleon and his influences on Egypt itself. which is very good. And then what else is there in there? Then it talks about the infamous Muhammad Ali, which is very important to Egypt. I wish in this chapter they did mention him slightly. Can't exactly forget. I forgot which page it was on. Let me see if I can find it. But they talked about Nubar Pasha, the first prime minister of Egypt, very, very briefly, which I think was a shame. I think Nubar Pasha needed a bit more sort of coverage on him, because he was crucial. He was the first prime minister of Egypt, and funnily enough, he was an Armenian who was Christian, which they did not mention. And I wish in this chapter they would also, and throughout the book, I wish they would talk a bit more about the Armenian influence in Egypt, which I feel was totally lacking in this book, because Armenians were crucial to Egyptian society since the 11th century. And as an Armenian that is from Egypt, I feel like that was very much lacking in this book. Barely any mentions of it, and I feel like they needed to talk about it more than what they did, because they didn't really talk about it at all. Then there was mid-19th century Egypt, and talking about all the political drama that happened during that time. And especially as we get more into the modern history, there's more details as there is more records, which makes sense, but I feel like there should have been, if you want to put that much detail towards the modern era, there should be, since it's the whole history of Egypt, there needs to be a bit more, because there is more context and more details about other Egyptian periods that are less modern. Then there is also the parliamentary era, which is sort of about Egypt's independence. Well, no, it not sort of is. It is about Egyptian independence, which is very good. Then it talks about Nasser's reign, and it does a very good job talking about sort of how ultra-nationalistic Nasser was, whether it be good or bad for the country. I think this book tries to stay impartial, but I think it's leaning towards that he was a bit too radical for the era, which is very well portrayed in many details, which is very good. The next chapter is about Sadat, and he does paint a very lovely picture of Sadat and his reign up until his assassination, of course, sadly. Lastly, there is Mubarak and Beyond, which talks about more the modern up till 2008. Sadly, this was in 2008, so it was just sort of before the Arab Springs, and it could have talked a bit about that, but of course it wasn't printed then. We need an updated, if you're watching this, Jason Thompson, we need an updated version of this book to cover the past tumultuous 15 years. So please come out with another version. I would do another book review if you did, so please. But overall, this is a lovely book. I would recommend anyone who isn't sure what period of Egyptian history they're interested in, whether it's ancient, Coptic, Roman, Islamic, or modern. I would highly suggest this book. Or if you just want an overall picture of Egyptian history, right, and how crucial Egypt was to the development of the modern world and how influential it was throughout every single era. No era has it, really until the present has it. And even today, it's still a very influential country, probably the most in Africa. It's good to know about such a powerful, rich country, rich in history and culture as Egypt, to understand its history in full. And I would highly recommend anyone to read this book so that they can educate themselves and learn more about the wonderful country of Egypt. Thank you very much. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more similar content, especially book reviews, please subscribe to my channel and like the video. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.